Okay, so this video is going to show you how to fit things inside other things. And the thing that I'm going to fit inside another thing is I would like to put some electronics inside this plane. I also want this sort of pilot canopy. I want that to be printed from a different material, so I don't want this to all be one material. When I 3D print this, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make the body and the wings and the tail all one color, and then I actually want the canopy to be clear, and I want to build a light into the canopy so that when you plug it in, this whole sort of light canopy section glows. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing that you're going to need to know how to do is how do you make a shape hollow? All right, and so I've got this plane here, and as you can see, it's very solid. So I've got to hollow it out through the middle, because if I hollow it out, I have some space to put wires and things like that. And so if we look at my plane and go, okay, what sort of shape is going to work hollowing that out? That's going to be a cylinder. So I'm going to come up here to my shape, and I'm going to select a cylinder, and I'm going to rotate my cylinder 90 degrees. And I'm also going to, let's look at the plane from behind, and I'm going to change my view to the flat view. And it just makes it much, much easier to line everything up. Okay, so here is my cylinder, and I'm going to move that 3 millimeters off the base because I want to leave at least 3 millimeters of thickness in my plane. I don't want to make my plane too thin. So I'm going to drag my cylinder up, and I'm going to drag it. I might not drag it out. I might change it by just putting in some measurements, and I can move that cylinder back into position. And that looks pretty much perfect. Right, now that I have my cylinder perfectly in position that way, I'm going to switch to viewing this from the side, or from what's saying the front here, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to make my cylinder much, much longer. So let's see what happens when I make my cylinder 120 millimeters long. Okay, so I can see my cylinder comes to about here, which is not quite far enough into my plane. So I'm going to move that further in, and we can see where it is because of the dotted line. Right, so my cylinder is right up in here. And I just want to make sure that there's enough space out the back. So I don't want to leave a little chunk here, so I'm actually going to drag my cylinder out a little bit. There we go. And now what I can do is I can select everything. So I can either drag around it like this, or I can hold shift, click my first shape, click my other shape. And you can see they've got dark lines around them, so they're selected. And then I'm going to group those together. All right, so you can see that my plane is now hollow. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the visor. So in order to make this visor a separate piece, I'm actually going to need it to be a separate shape in my model. And there's two different ways that I could do that. One would be click on my plane and ungroup everything. So basically break my plane back into all of its individual parts. All right, so here's my plane in all its individual parts, and I could grab this visor and I could pull it out and I could make some changes to it. The other way, so I'm just going to go undo. The other way that I could do that is I could just put another visor in there. So I'm going to do that option because sometimes it's a little bit more useful if you don't want to wind back 300 steps through a complicated design and actually break it apart to actually just remake your shape. So here's my visor. It's a little sphere. I'm going to take my sphere and I'm going to stretch it into a visor shape. And I might make it 20 mil wide. And then you see how mine's on a little bit of an angle? I'm going to try and do that again. So I'm going to grab this and holding down my mouse button, I'm just going to get that on about the same angle. Beautiful, looking pretty good. All right, so what I'm going to do now, try and put my visor into position. Now moving your view around makes it much easier to change your view. And might drop that down just a little bit. And you can see that I've sort of got just a little bit of that old visor shape there which I don't really want. So what I might do is I might just make this, might just make the visor that I'm working on a little bit wider so that it covers that. And now it's not quite in the center. If I click on top, I can see that it's slightly, crooked, and I don't like that. So I'm going to click, I'm going to hold down Shift, I'm going to click on my plane, and then I'm going to use the Align tool. So click on the Align tool, and now what I can do is I've got these little tabs, and that lets me align it in the center. And that looks pretty good to me. All right, lovely. So there is my separate shape. Here is my plane. Now, there's more to do. So if I'm going to print this out of one material and put it into this plane, I'm going to need a hole to actually drop that shape into, right? So what I need to do is I actually need to turn this into a hole. But if I turn it straight into a hole, then I lose my shape, right? So what I'm going to do first is I am going to click on my visor and I'm going to click duplicate. So I want another copy of that, and I can move that just out on the side like this. So this is the one that I'm going to print. This is the one that I'm going to use to make a hole. Now, before we make this into a hole, I want you to think about what's going to happen when this is printed. When this is printed, it's going to have a hole in it. Let's change that to hole. So when it's printed, it's going to have a hole in it, and I'm going to try and fit this into that hole. Now, if they're exactly the same size, they're not going to fit, or this is not going to fit into that hole, because when you 3D print things, holes tend to shrink and objects tend to become just ever so slightly bigger. Not a lot bigger, but very, very slightly bigger. So what we need to do is make this hole slightly bigger. So I'm going to click on the corner. So if this is 22, I'm going to change this and I'm going to make it 23. And if this is, 41.5, I'm going to make this 42.5. And now it's moved it and it's no longer aligned, so we'll use the Align tool again. Boom. Lovely. And now that we've done that, we can click on this visor, hold down Shift, click on our plane, and we can combine those. All right, great. So that has cut a hole, which goes all the way into the clear sort of guts of our plane. And now we can work on this. Now, what I want to do with this little shape is I want to put a 5mm LED inside it so that it lights up. And so the best way for me to do that is to get a cylinder, drop it in the work plane, and I'm going to make that cylinder 5.5 by 5.5. The reason that I'm making it slightly oversized is, again, when you 3D print something that has a hole in it, the hole tends to shrink a little bit, and the LEDs are 5mm. So we need to make the hole ever so slightly larger than the LED that we're going to put in there. And what I can do now is I can lift this up. I might change my view. Okay, so now my hole is inside my sort of visor or canopy. And what I might want to do is I might want to swivel it so that it matches the angle a little bit more. I might move it back a bit. And we might move that just a little bit further up. And then I might look at it from the bottom because it's not in alignment. So to align it, I've already selected that shape. I can hold down Shift, select the visor, and I can use the Align tool. So there's Align. I'm happy with that. That's perfect. So now I can select those both and combine them. All right, now the last thing I need to do is I need to make sure that my shapes can actually be 3D printed. Right? So there's no flat surface for this to stick down on the 3D printer bed and actually print. So we're going to have to stick a flat surface on that. The easiest way to do that is I'm going to drag this block in. I'm going to make this block quite a bit bigger. I'm going to raise this up and I just swivel it so that it matches the visor a little bit more. Lovely, I'm happy with that. All right, hold down Shift, select my visor, select my shape, join them together. And there is a shape that I can 3D print because it has a flat bottom that I can stick onto the 3D print bed. Now this plane, similarly, it's going to be a bit of a pain to print because we've got no real flat section that we can lay it down, and also we've got these wings that are going to hang out with nothing to support them. Now remember, if things have nothing to support them, nothing underneath them, then nothing can be 3D printed. The plastic basically comes out like a noodle and just squirts through the air. So what we need to do is we need to break this shape up into into two halves. And I'm going to just get this out of the way. So breaking this up into two halves, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to do very similar to what I did before. I'm going to use a shape to slice off the bottom. So grab my square, stick it on my work plane, and at the moment I'm just going to drag it out so that it is big enough that it covers the whole plane. So that means I need to drag it out so that it goes right around the wings. All right, there we go. Now, what I also need to do is I want to cut my plane right below the wings, right? So right below the wings, because that means I'm going to have two halves that I can print. So what I will do is I'll grab this, and I think there's a little gap there. So what I'm going to do is just move this until there is no gap, so it's right at the bottom of the wings. So I zoomed right in there so I could see. So that's going to be perfect. Okay, now, if I click this shape, and I combine them, I'm going to lose half my plane. And we have to wait because Tinkercad has to think about it, because we're asking it to do a lot of cutting on a lot of different shapes. There we go. So I've lost half my plane, which was what I was sort of trying to do, but now I need the bottom half, so that's no good. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is I'm going to select everything here. I'm going to duplicate it, so that's going to give me a copy. And what I'm going to do now is on this copy that I made, I'm going to grab my box from the bottom, and I am going to grab that, and I'm just going to stretch it so that it comes up. Oop, that's not right. That's not right either. All right, maybe I'm not going to be able to move it side to side. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to do a little bit of thinking. All right, so look at my box shape. How tall is my box? The box is exactly 21 millimeters tall. So if I move this 21 millimeters up, and I can see that on my right, so there's 21. And then I grab my box and I make it a bit taller so that it covers half the plane. Okay, so now what'll happen, if I combine these shapes, I keep the bottom of my plane, and if I combine these shapes, I keep the top of my plane. So let's do that. Select both of those, combine them. Select both of those and combine them. All right, and there is two halves of a plane that I can print. This piece I can flip upside down and I can print it like that. And we can print arches. Arches are okay. And this half of the plane I can print just like this. And there's an arch, and arches are okay. So I end up with three pieces that I can print. If I wanted to, I could print them in three different colors or three different materials. These two I'll print the same. This one I'll print out of clear material so that I've got a space for my light. And that's how you combine different shapes for 3D printing, how you hollow a shape out, and how you split objects apart.